West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
In the category of things we watch so you don't have to, Donald Trump has spent most of the day raging, absolutely raging on social media. And a focus of his ire today is New York Attorney General Letitia James. It is because next month, on October 2nd, Donald Trump will go on trial in the civil lawsuit brought against him, his family, and his business by Attorney General James. She was to bar them from running the company and is seeking a $250 million fine for allegedly inflating the value of the company's assets by as much as $2.2 billion a year. AG James is requesting a summary judgment in the case based on what she calls, quote, the mountain of undisputed evidence in the case. Meanwhile, Democrats on the House Oversight Committee have some questions of their own about another source of revenue and extreme wealth in the Trump family. Ranking member Jamie Raskin is asking the Republican chairman James Comer, who seems very concerned about the business dealings of children of presidents, especially the current president's son, who's never worked for the United States government. He's asked him to subpoena the investment firm run by Trump's son-in-law, Jared Kushner. Jared Kushner received a staggering $2 billion, with a B, dollar investment from Saudi Arabia and other Middle Eastern countries after he quit the Trump White House. Joining our coverage of this, Democratic Congressman Robert Garcia of California. He's a member of the House Oversight Committee and of the House Homeland Security Committee. Tim O'Brien is with us as well. Congressman, I start with you. You've got an incredible body of news reporting. I think the New York Times has reported on the fact that Jared Kushner got so much more than Steve Mnuchin when Jared Kushner did not have as successful of a record in the business arena as Steve Mnuchin. You've also got former Trump insiders, people like his final chief, or not final, but I guess his second chief of staff, John Kelly, saying that even inside the White House, there were questions about what Jared Kushner was doing some of the time. So tell me about this effort at this point to dig into the ex-president's son-in-law, Jared Kushner's business dealings.
Absolutely. Well, thanks. I mean, look, I think it's very clear. You have Jared Kushner, who worked on Middle East policy, who was the lead person in the Trump White House when it came to working within the Middle East and Saudi Arabia. And a few months after office and a few months after he leaves the White House, he's receiving $2 billion plus from the Saudi government. So if there isn't smoke there, I don't know what else could be worse. I mean, we're looking at a situation here where the Oversight Committee is really serious about what the Kushners did, how they received the $2 billion plus, what he actually did to receive that money. And so the letter and our effort, led by Chair Raskin on our end, is to ensure that we get the facts on what happened. We want to subpoena the documents. We want to ensure and see how did Kushner receive so much money right after he left, and what did he do to actually get those services? And so, well, we think this is a pretty serious issue. I think that Comer himself has said that he thinks it may have crossed the ethical line. And so our request is pretty simple. Let's see the documents, let's subpoena the documents, and let's find out why the Saudi Arabian government paid the Kushners $2 billion after leaving the White House.
You know, I went down to the Trump White House exactly one time, but it was the day that Jared Kushner was briefing the press about Donald Trump's first foreign trip. And I ran into him in a hallway, and he was beaming about the strategy of taking Donald Trump to Saudi Arabia first. He was also known to have text using WhatsApp and other encrypted messaging systems with Middle Eastern leaders for the duration of the presidency. Will you seek to subpoena those WhatsApp messages and really understand the entirety of the relationship between Kushner and the leaders he communicated with directly?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, he was probably beaming, thinking about all the money he was going to make and grip off the American people. And all the documents that are available to us, we want to be able to get access to. It's pretty interesting that the House Republican majority, especially the Oversight Committee, are obsessed with a private citizen, Hunter Biden, and his business dealings, yet are unwilling to focus the seriousness of this issue on someone that actually worked inside the White House.
Yeah. Do you have any interest from your Senate colleagues, who obviously are in the majority over there, to run investigations in any of their oversight committees?
Yeah, I mean, those discussions are happening. I think, obviously, Jamie Raskin is engaged in those conversations. So is our committee. We think there is, and we've heard some of the senators already kind of share some of their concerns. But we're really concerned on the House side, and we're really concerned on the Oversight Committee. And this is just a pattern of the way the Kushners have financially benefited from their jobs inside the White House, and they continue to attack the president's family, who have not worked a job in the White House, who have not been paid by the White House, yet they can't and will not hold accountable the Kushners, who clearly have some huge scheme and are enriching themselves by billions of dollars from Middle East governments.
You know, Tim O'Brien, the ex-president does such a volume business of scandal that I feel like it was sometimes hard for the press and Democrats and ethical people to look in any one place for long. But Jared Kushner was doing what Jared Kushner was doing the whole time. Are you surprised that it didn't get attention before this?
Well, I do think, I think we talked about it a couple of years ago, Nicole, about Kushner specifically and the Saudi investment. I think the issue with Jared Kushner is that he is so ignorant and unschooled that people to some degree expected him to be harmless. And the reality was he was in a White House that was making policy, particularly foreign policy. And I think he had his own eyes set on what he was going to do when he left the White House. Jared Kushner, like Donald Trump, his professional life and most of his life overall was helped along by his father's wealth. He has never really achieved very much on his own. And then suddenly he leaves the White House, a man with absolutely no hardball investment experience. When people invest $1 billion like they did with Steve Mnuchin, or $2 billion like they did with Jared Kushner, they expect to see a track record because they want a return on their money. Jared Kushner is not somebody any well-heeled, savvy investor is going to give that kind of money to unless they think there's other things to be gained from outside of an investment return. They already knew from his time in the White House that the Trump White House had overridden Congress's opposition to a Saudi arms deal. The Trump White House soft-pedaled pressing the Saudis on Jamal Khashoggi's murder. So there were clearly possible quid pro quos while he was in the White House. He's now, after leaving the White House, he gets this windfall of investment money, I think because the Saudis were placing their bets on the possibility that Donald Trump might come into the White House again, and they'd have an easy mark in Jared Kushner. I think there's a money trail that can be followed there, as you've asked. There's possibly a communications trail. I think it should cloud anything Kushner does for the campaign, Trump's campaign. The possibility that Jared Kushner will be in the White House again, this has to weigh heavily on that, because it's a deep national security problem on top of being an ethical quagmire. And as Congressman Garcia mentioned, it's more than passing strange that the GOP is intent on tarring Hunter Biden with some of these allegations when the proof, or at least the evidence, of stuff that's much more problematic with Jared Kushner hasn't been equally probed.
Carson, really quick last question. Do you plan to call Rex Tillerson, who was rather famously and publicly humiliated by Jared Kushner pulling the rug out from under him when he was the country's Secretary of State?
We'd love to. I mean, absolutely. I think that there's a lot there, and there's definitely a history of not just Jared Kushner, but the family, including Ivanka, including Donald Trump, in benefiting from foreign investments and foreign intervention. So it is an ethical issue, but also a national security issue. I completely agree, and we'd love to hear from him.
It is Monday, the 4th of September of 2023, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner, the English bulldog, is our snoozing sous chef. Precious is our little Yorkie, and she is also our door girl, and she will be seating you directly for our especially special daily special. It happens to be a Labor Day holiday. River City Hash Mondays for a Labor Day. And are we working? I don't know. Anyway, we're here, and we got nowhere else to go at this time of the morning, so we might as well be here. And here we are. So how are you doing? What a weekend, huh? And we got a week ahead of us, and I hope that you're enjoying your Labor Day weekend holiday day. We had a little bit of rain over the weekend, which put a big damper on these wildfires that have been, well, burning out of control on the West Coast, and quite a drenching, which was nice. And we expect maybe not here, well, I mean here at the mothership in Rogue River, we do have some rain in the area, and we could get some isolated showers blow through here, and that would be nice. Just as long as it's not lightning starting fires, but things got pretty well drenched, so we like that. The air, and we'll go through that during the weather report, but the air is a lot cleaner too. It's nice. Washed all that gunk out of the sky, and now it's going into our watersheds. Well, what else happened? What else happened? The big guy, the former guy, is not very happy. He's not a happy camper. And speaking of happy campers, Joey Biggs. Now this guy wanted to live under an authoritarian dictatorship. And now that he's in prison under pretty much an authoritarian dictatorship, he doesn't like the food. He doesn't like it there. He wants out. He's begging Trump to do something, like Trump has some sort of power to do it now. Yeah, how long will he last? You know, everybody thinks that they're going to be a hero in jail until they go. I'm going to be tank power. Everybody's going to be afraid of me. Then you get there and you realize, oh my God, it is so boring here. How do I know? In my youth, I failed to pay, well, a few parking tickets that went to warrant. I just ignored them. Who cares? And I was out of the county in which I had had all these parking tickets. And I got incarcerated in the Marin County Jail, which is a way station for people coming or going to and coming from San Quentin. Yeah. You know, where they have the gas chamber. They had the gas chamber there. Then. It was a gas chamber even then. So, picked me up on a Friday, and it just happened actually to be a holiday weekend, and there would be no judge to adjudicate my my transport to San Francisco till Tuesday. So trust me, I was on the horn getting some friends to get my money out of my bank account so they could bail me out. I did not like it. Not one whit. Joey Biggs and the rest of them are going to be in there for decades. Decades. Yeah, one thing I noticed also is the cruelty of the guards. Because when I was bailed out, they like to make it last forever. Came in, just said, hey, Putnam, get your stuff together. You're getting processed out. So I got all my stuff together. An hour passes. 3 hours pass. 6 hours go by. I finally ask a guard, what's up? I don't know. So after about 18 hours of waiting around, then I got to sit in another room for another 4 hours. How nice is that? Let alone my friends. They weren't there for like 18, 20 some odd hours, but they were there for over 3 hours waiting for me to be processed out. Yeah, there's a certain level of cruelty. Mm-hmm. And this is back in the day when everybody was smoking too, and I didn't smoke. Oh, God. What a cesspool that place was. And that was supposed to be the Frank Lloyd Wright building. Well, I guess it looked pretty nice inside. I guess. A lot of green walls. Not dark green, kind of like a lighter green. Yeah, so I understand where Joey Biggs is coming from. But parking tickets, trying to violently overthrow the United States of America. 2 different levels of reasons for being behind bars. I didn't like mine, and that was nothing. It was nothing. In fact, that's what I thought about at the time. What if I was in here for something serious? Where they pretty much just throw away the key. Yeah, well, let's put it this way. From then onward, I processed every bit of paper. No delays on anything anymore. I learned my lesson. Did this guy? No. None of these seditious insurgents have learned a lesson. All right? Let's be clear about this. They are a danger to society, and they need to be kept behind bars. And I don't know, maybe they also need to have a little bit of shall we say, counseling? Because they obviously have not seen the error of their ways. They want off, but they don't want to change their behavior. Okay. So maybe they can't be rehabbed and we need some, what is the word, retribution? My middle name is Justice. I'm the one that should be meting out retribution, pal. But even I know that's not correct in a representative democracy, and don't you dare get on with this Republic BS. I know it already. Okay, we do have quite a bit to attend to for our news read today, so why don't we get into it, and hopefully we'll get through them without having to abbreviate too much. And what do we have in store? Well, at the top, yes, of course, everybody knows, but I still wanted to reiterate it about the House Oversight Committee, at least the Democrats on it, want to subpoena Jared Kushner over his business dealings with Saudi Arabia after leaving the White House. On the rest of the menu, prominent right-wing online influencers claim neo-Nazi groups demonstrating across the state of Florida are part of a false flag operation staged by the federal government to smear their otherwise righteous, conservative movements. Yeah, it's a movement, all right. A crackdown on woke coverage is tearing Atlanta Magazine apart, and a Minnesota prison reached a resolution with inmates who refused to return to their cells, which were registering 115 degrees inside the cells, during the heat wave over the weekend. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where scientists finally know why Germany's wild boar are surprisingly radioactive. Surprising, I guess. And less than 2 weeks after a successful uncrewed landing near the south pole of the moon, India launched its first space mission to study the sun. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, to the right of the page is the chat room link monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. Across the page to the left from that chat room link near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com is the link to our Patreon page. And if you could help us pay our bills by sending us what you might spend on an espresso-type coffee drink once a month, that really does help us pay our bills, and we thank you to those of you who have been so generous in doing so over these many years, thus allowing us to fulfill our civic duty as the founders originally intended so many years ago. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter, Mastodon, Spoutable, Blue Sky, etc., you can do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of those and a lot more. Thanks, Tom. Follow me on those social media sites as well at Justice Putnam. Now, I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Co's 10 minutes before showtime, and then link that up to all of those social media sites, and that way you can read the actual articles that we are drawing such inspiration from each day here at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. If you would like to follow the show on Twitter, it's just a placemat. We're going to do more on these other media sites. You can look for us at Cookbook West on Twitter, and also you can pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, not Stitcher. You can do it on Spreaker, but not Stitcher. You keep making a mistake, but Stitcher no longer exists because of SiriusXM. How dare they? After all these years. Okay. Enough of that. It's Labor Day, and we need to get it on. Gerald Holt from the Daily Beast brings us this first offering here on this Labor Day River City Hash Mondays. Just 1 week after a man shot and killed 3 black people in a Florida Dollar General with a rifle he decorated with swastikas, numerous prominent right-wing online influencers seem to agree. The neo-Nazi groups that demonstrated just 2 hours south of that murder must have been part of a false flag operation staged by the federal government to smear their otherwise righteous conservative movements. At first glance, one might begin to wonder if these clickbait hawks could be onto something. The scenes that played out around Orlando, Florida on Saturday were almost cartoonish after all. Dozens of individuals, most of whom wore face coverings to conceal their identities. Notice how they never have like CO2 saturation levels spike when they're wearing swastikas and masks. That swastika keeps the CO2 levels low, apparently. Well, they marched while waving flags emblazoned with swastikas, throwing up single-arm Nazi salutes, and belting out their affinity for Adolf Hitler and hatred of Jewish people. A similar but separate group of neo-Nazis made scenes at the entrance to Disney World. They had their own swastika flags and pro-Hitler signs, and they made it a point to destroy a LGBTQ pride flag for the people filming them. At least 5 known neo-Nazi groups appeared to be active around Florida this weekend, and there was little, if any, notable resistance to their presence. But for all the allegations that ostensibly mainstream conservatives make that these neo-Nazis and other others like them are feds staging fake protests to sway public opinion or entrap conservative activists. They offer remarkably scant evidence to support their claims. Of course they don't offer any evidence. They don't have any. Most appeal to ignorance, encouraging their target demographic audiences to understand and assume lack of personal experiences with right-wing extremism as a truism about the world at large. Unlike most good conspiracy theories, they often contain grains of truth that are spun to support their nonsense claims. The neo-Nazis participating in these protests represented groups that extremism researchers, like myself, Gerald Holden, by the way, have been tracking for years. They are real, organized, and serious about what they are spreading. Ideologies that inspire bloodshed and violence, often against minority communities. And the question I have is, why is DeSantis not saying anything against them, and in fact encourages their behavior? Laura Wagner of the Washington Post brings us this next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. River City Ash Mondays on a Labor Day. On a hot Tuesday in late June, staffers at Atlanta Magazine gathered for a tense meeting with longtime publisher Sean McGinnis. On his agenda, pronouns. Are we, as a matter of fact, now writing stories based upon preferred pronouns, McGinnis asked, citing a recent profile of a labor organizer? She is referred to as they throughout the story. One editor responded that using pronouns corresponding with a subject's identity is standard journalistic practice, not a left or right thing, the editor said, but the publisher disagreed. According to a recording of the meeting obtained by the Post, he said people will think that this is taking a stance. Yeah, on grammar. It was hardly the first time colleagues have disagreed over editorial choices in Atlanta or anywhere in the media industry where business concerns, personal politics, and news judgment often come into conflict, but McGinnis's statements and subsequent requests to approve editorial content ahead of publication marked a tipping point in a small-scale cultural war that had been building for a few years within the award-winning magazine. Staffers saw the interference as an egregious crackdown on coverage that management deems as too progressive at a time when they are resolved to reflect the evolving reality of Atlanta, one of the blackest, queerest cities in the South. Now, 3 of 6 full-time editorial staffers have resigned, citing untenable corporate interference, and the editor-in-chief has announced plans to retire at the end of the year. McGinnis did not respond to repeated messages and emails. His current and former employees say they are concerned that their longtime boss's perception of Atlanta's leftward drift is based less on his own opinions than on orders from his bosses. The owners of a Michigan-based publishing company that purchased Atlanta and several other regional magazines, who McGinnis told them believe woke coverage is bad for business and wants it to stop. holiday weekend staff at the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. A Minnesota prison is resolved without incident, a situation involving about 100 inmates in one housing unit who would not return to their cells on Sunday yesterday in what one former inmate there called an act of self-preservation amid dangerously high temperatures in the region. The situation was calm, peaceful, and stable throughout the day, a Department of Corrections spokesperson said in a statement, adding that incarcerated individuals in the unit indicated dissatisfaction because the understaffed facility had to limit inmates' time out of their cells. But advocates positioned outside of the Stillwater prison, some of whom have family members inside, said inmates are fed up with the excessive heat, lack of air conditioning, and limited access to showers and ice during on and off lockdowns over the past 2 months. The prison is in Bayport, about 25 miles east of Minneapolis, which was under an afternoon heat advisory for temperatures approaching 100 degrees outside. The department confirmed that inmates had been in lockdown status because of the holiday weekend, meaning they are kept in their cells with limited access to facility-wide out-of-cell time for showers, phone use, and recreation. The facility remains on lockdown now, and all inmates have returned to the cells. The executive director of the union, representing Stillwater's correctional officers, said in a statement that the incident is endemic and highlights the truth behind the operations of the Minnesota Department of Corrections with chronic understaffing. Spokesperson said, or the executive director is named Bart Anderson, by the way, said such conditions upset inmates because of restrictions on programs and recreation time when there are not enough security staff to protect the facility. Intense heat waves across the country have led to amplified concern for prison populations, especially those in poorly ventilated or non-existent air-conditioned facilities. All right, that brings us to our break. And when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. This week, products and cliches. With that teaser, you might think a negative review is on the way, but the new Gran Turismo is actually a fun watch despite it being the kind of film that a lot of critics find to be a target-rich environment. It's the reality-based story of the UK's champion race car driver, Jan Mardenborough, who even before this movie was known for having begun his racing career in front of a PlayStation console rather than on a track. Jan's parents, whose internet connection in 1997 Cardiff, Wales is apparently good enough for online action gaming, are more than worried about their son wasting his time in the game. Teen parent cliche. Jan enters and eventually wins a contest to attend a real-world training competition, the winner of which will get a contract to drive for Nissan Racing, whose logo is ubiquitous here. Once Mardenborough is in, it suffices to say that there isn't universal support for him from the racing establishment. Yep, he's an underdog, so check off that beloved cliche. Director Neil Blomkamp of District 9 and Chappie fame is a bit out of his political sweet spot with this one, as racing at this level is pretty capitalist and elitist, and unlike those movies, this one isn't edgy like that. There's a standout performance here from David Harbour as an ex-racer and Jan's trainer. He's not real and is part of the liberties taken with the real-life story, but he's brilliant as the foil young Jan, Archie Madekwe, needs. The racing sequences smack of Ford v Ferrari, with some pretty cool exploded view still frames not seen before. In sum, Gran Turismo should work for race fans, gamers, and cliches be damned, anyone who enjoys a story of unlikely success. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. Catch up with us at take2moviereview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
Brian Merchant is the tech columnist at the LA Times and the author of a new book called Blood in the Machine: The Origin of the Rebellion Against Big Tech. Blood in the Machine tells the story of the Luddites and what their plight tells us about automation today. And I've heard their movement mentioned a lot recently, particularly in relation to generative AI. For instance, news recently broke that copyrighted books, including those by Stephen King, were used to train an AI language model. And then King wrote an essay for The Atlantic in which he says he wouldn't forbid this type of thing and that anyone who would might as well be, quote, a Luddite trying to stop industrial progress by hammering a steam loom to pieces. This idea that Luddites just hated new technology is pretty pervasive. But is it accurate?
It is not accurate. It's one that's been lodged in the cultural consciousness for almost 200 years now, though, so it's hard to blame him. And, I love Stephen King. I love his writing. I love his writing on writing. But he's fallen victim to this fallacy about the Luddites, which is that they were technophobic. They wanted to stop progress itself, which couldn't be further from the truth. So what the Luddites wanted to do was to stop the machinery that was very specifically exploiting them or being used as leverage against them to reduce their quality of life, to cut their wages, to force them into factories. So the Luddites protest against machinery, again, against very specific kinds of machinery. They were technologists. They loved technology themselves in many cases, but they had issue with specific machinery being used in specific ways, namely by elites who wanted to force them into factories and degrade their standard of living.
Would you say that their attempt to rebel against this succeeded or failed?
That's a really complicated question. It was illegal to form a union in those days, so they were forced to use very creative tactics to sort of register their complaint. And when they did take up arms in this very specific way, for the first 6 months or so, they were very successful in the short term in getting some of those wages raised, getting their conditions improved, getting back some of the bargaining power they had lost. In the medium term, they were less successful because their movement was violently crushed by the British state and by the Crown and by the industrialists who the Crown was assisting. And dozens of Luddites were hung, others were killed in those protests. And then the victors of that battle got the opportunity to impress upon history this idea that Luddism is backwards looking, establishing what's basically a propaganda campaign on behalf of those industrialists to equate progress with any kind of technology at all, even technology that could exploit hundreds of thousands of people as it did.
And we're in a moment now when technology is again threatening people's jobs. Specifically, there have been a lot of stories about generative AI being used to replace copywriters, the idea that it could threaten the jobs of software coders, that instead of hiring an illustrator, places are just going to use this AI-generated art. So can we draw any parallels? What parallels can we draw between the situation the Luddites were in and then the modern automation threatening jobs today?
The way that I would put it is that the parallels are uncanny. So much is aligned with what was going on at the Luddites' time that we can really go one-to-one in a lot of cases. So here's this revolutionary seeming new technology, AI, generative AI, that its creators are claiming have vast power, can replace vast numbers of jobs. That was very similar to what was happening 200 years ago. You had the entrepreneurs adopting things like the power loom or the wide frame or the implements that would automate various parts of the cloth industry, saying this new machinery is going to be a great boon to England. It's going to be an engine of progress. In reality, again, this is a parallel. Neither of the technologies were quite there yet, right? And so in a lot of cases, the technology could be used more powerfully by the entrepreneurs or by the industrialists as leverage or bargaining power or a means of saying, hey, we need to reduce wages because we're just going to use the machinery to do it anyways.
And you mentioned how when the Luddites were doing their protests, they didn't have unions. They didn't have the right to do this sort of collective action, as opposed to today when we have, for the first time in decades, in Hollywood, writers and actors, they're all going on strike, not solely because of AI, but that's definitely one of the issues that they're trying to deal with as part of these strikes. So do you think that they are more likely to succeed than the Luddites were?
Absolutely. I think the crucial difference is that, this is an industry that is very well organized, that has a good deal of power, and they can force their employers to the bargaining table to hash out these issues. We should be thankful that they have sort of sounded this clarion call, because in a lot of ways, the same issues are going to be coming for other industries. So the writers and the artists stand to be more successful for that reason alone, that they are organized and it's popular. Again, I think, I don't know if I mentioned, the Luddites were super popular in the day. They were like Robin Hood. They were cheered in the streets because just about everybody understood the way that the wind was blowing.
And it's not just in the case of the writer's strike that I've heard the term Luddite used. Another example is that in San Francisco right now, there's a big rollout of these self-driving robo-taxis. And there have been a lot of issues coming up around this, but one of them is a group has been protesting them by putting traffic cones on the hoods of these cars because it tells the sensors that there's an obstacle, there's something wrong, and so the car stops with no damage to it, but it is a form of protest. And some of the protesters have been compared to Luddites. Now, the issue for them is not their own employment, but they are protesting this technology. Do you think it's still fair to say that this is a sort of Luddite movement?
Yeah, I think this is a Luddite tactic through and through, and not in the derogatory sense, in the sense that these are people who are standing up for their community when democratic channels have been sort of ignored. I mean, if you look at the polling data and you look at the general sentiment, people don't want driverless cars running rampant in their communities. We've seen very viscerally how dangerous it can be, how deadly self-driving car technology can be in some cases, and what a nuisance it can be to things like emergency service providers and firefighters, policemen. They've all come out against this and said, not yet. And it's unclear, I think, to most people why it needs to be rammed through, why the experimentation period can't be longer or can't be more careful. So if we can't get the bare level of assurances and transparency from government when new technologies are rolled out, I think it's completely justified for people to basically do Luddism.
And you've mentioned that the Luddites in the short term were successful, but in the long term, they were the subject of a propaganda campaign. We've got Stephen King being like, being a Luddite is futile. It's resisting technology for no purpose. And that's the idea that many people still have hundreds of years later. So if you were going to give advice to modern Luddites, what do you think they need to do to avoid the same fate?
I think we're getting to the point to where people have at least loosened their knee-jerk reaction in that direction. We're kind of at this point again where the negative effects of technology in a lot of spheres, whether you're talking about in the working world or social media overstimulation, we're seeing a lot of the detrimental effects of technology, and we're seeing sort of a resurgence of this desire to be able to offer more input and have more say in how it's rolled out. We've sort of handed the keys to a handful of Silicon Valley giants and said, okay, see what you can come up with, and then we'll kind of deal with it. We'll take the rearguard action. But it does not have to be that way. And that's what I want to sort of beat home. Like the Luddites represented an alternate path. If we look at what they really stood for, it really comes down to a more just, more equitable, and more democratic development of technology, one that more people would have benefited from. How do we do that today?
Science Quickly is produced by Jeff Delvicio, Talika Bose, Kelso Harper, and Corinne Leong. Our show is edited by Ella Feder and Alexa Lim. Our theme music was composed by Dominic Smith. Don't forget to subscribe to Science Quickly wherever you get your podcasts. For more in-depth science news and features, go to scientificamerican.com. And if you like the show, give us a rating or review. For Scientific American's Science Quickly, I'm Sophie Bushwick.
I'm probably okay to have one more drink before I drive home. I'm Probably okay. I opened the window to stay alert. Probably okay. I just popped some gum in my mouth.
Step out of the car, please.
I probably made a mistake.
Probably okay isn't okay when it comes to drinking and driving. If you see a warning sign, stop and call a cab, a car, or a friend. Buzzed driving is drunk driving. A message brought to you by NHTSA and the Ad Council.
We're the Goo Goo Dolls. We're fortunate that our daughters have what they need to grow and learn. But that isn't the case for nearly 13 million kids in the U.S. that struggle with hunger.
Childhood hunger is a heartbreaking reality that Feeding America is working to change. Each year, the Feeding America network of food banks rescues billions of pounds of good food that would have gone to waste and provides it to families and children in need.
You can help kids in need in your community by visiting feedingamerica.org.
Brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
Can you be banned from voting when you're 90 because of a crime you committed when you were 18? I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. 15 states have a lifetime ban on voting as part of their punishment for various crimes. Note, 35 states don't. Now, consider Mississippi, where the state's constitution, adopted in 1890, specified for the lifetime voting ban crimes which, historians agree, were disproportionately prosecuted against black people. Unfortunately, lawsuits claiming that these lifetime bans violate equal protection have lost. But a challenge to Mississippi's lifetime ban recently won, based on an entirely different legal theory. The Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals 2-1 has ruled that the state's lifetime ban on voting violates the Eighth Amendment prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment. Because for people who have completed their sentence, this continuous punishment, this lifetime deprivation of the most basic democratic right, serves no legitimate purpose of sentencing. It's irrational, constitutes vengeance, is punishment simply for the sake of punishment, and therefore is cruel. And because only 15 of the 50 states have such bans, down from 31 in 1974, it now also is unusual. The dissent said the legislature can have a voting ban if it wants one, and the state attorney general has vowed to appeal. So, the case is likely headed to the Supreme Court. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU, because freedom can't protect itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1949. That was the day known in New York as the Peekskill Riots. Internationally renowned African-American singer Paul Robeson was scheduled to give an open-air concert. He was known for his deep, moving voice, singing iconic songs like Shenandoah and the Ballad of Joe Hill. Robeson was active in the causes of civil and labor rights. In the Cold War hysteria after World War II, Robeson had been labeled a dangerous communist. The New York concert was originally planned to benefit the Civil Rights Congress. The group had been defending the Trenton Six, a group of 6 young black men sentenced to die in New Jersey for allegedly killing a white shopkeeper. The case was rife with legal abuses, but protests over the concert led to its cancellation. It was rescheduled, and the tickets were distributed to trade unionists in New York City. On the day of the concert, 2,500 union members made a human wall around the field to protect against protesters. Protesters gathered, hurling anti-black and anti-Jewish racial epithets. Pete Seeger opened the concert, followed by Robeson. The real trouble came when the concert ended and people tried to leave. The protesters threw rocks at passing cars, while policemen stood by and watched. 145 people were injured. Other concerts were canceled. Paul Robeson would continue to be harassed by the FBI. He was denied a passport due to his stance against anti-black discrimination in the United States and against colonialism in Africa.
I dreamed I saw Joe Hill last night, alive as you and me.
Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com. Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, River City Hash Mondays on a Labor Day. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 61 degrees Fahrenheit. Expecting highs only in the mid to upper 70s with cloudy skies early, followed by partial clearing with a slight chance of a rain shower or two throughout the day, and winds will be light and variable. A clear sky overnight with winds out of the northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour, lows in the low 50s. That'll be nice. And then mainly sunny sky tomorrow with highs in the mid-80s, winds out of the northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Ragweed pollen has overtaken grass pollen as the predominant pollen bothering us who are bothered by pollen. It is rated moderate here in our little town of Rogue River. The air quality index for the region is in the good range at 26 parts per million, and that daytime UV index is in the high range, though it has ticked down one to level 6. Barometric pressure is currently holding steady at 30.06 inches. Visibility is up to 9 miles, and relative humidity is at 85%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. London is 83 degrees and fair. Paris is 87 and sunny with a heat advisory. Rome is 88 degrees and sunny with its own heat advisory. Kabul is 70 degrees and clear. Kyiv is 72 and mostly cloudy. Hong Kong is 86 and partly cloudy. Tokyo is 80 degrees with light rain. Melbourne, Victoria, Australia is 50 degrees and partly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 58 degrees and cloudy. Chicago, Illinois is 82 and sunny. And New York, New York is 81 degrees Fahrenheit and fair. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world, and that is the Weather Underground. Kasha Patel of the Washington Post brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. On April 26 of 1986, the infamous explosion at a Chernobyl nuclear power plant unleashed large amounts of radiation into the atmosphere, an event that contaminated wildlife across country lines. The radiation level seen in animals as a result has decreased in recent years, with the exception of one animal, the wild boar. For years, scientists questioned why levels of a radioactive isotope known as cesium-137 have remained surprisingly high in wild boars rooting around in Germany and Austria, while decreasing in deer and roe deer. In a new study released last week,
a team of researchers finally solved this wild boar paradox. They uncovered that the main radioactive source is not the Chernobyl accident, but nuclear weapons testing from the 1960s. My mind was blown when I realized how relevant this source of radioactive contamination in general still is, said Georg Steinhauser, a radiochemist at TU Wien and author of the new study. Steinhauser said that people might not think that 60 years after nuke weapons explosions, wild boar populations would still be contaminated with radiation levels well above the regulatory food limit. Researchers have previously proposed other explanations to no avail. Some thought the contamination levels in wild boar were actually decreasing, but the data did not show up in the limited number of studied samples. Steinhauser previously suggested that perhaps the cesium dissolves better in fat tissue in wild boars and stays present longer, but subsequent research did not support that assertion either. In the new research, Steinhauser and his colleagues took a step back and reinvestigated the amount and origin of cesium in wild boars. Working with hunters collecting wild boar meat across southern Germany, they measured cesium levels with a gamma-ray detector. Radioactive cesium results from both nuclear weapons explosion and nuclear energy production. The element comes in different isotopic composition, cesium-135 and cesium-137, depending on the source. By analyzing the ratio of these amounts, the researchers can pinpoint the source of the radiation. From previous literature, the team knew a higher ratio of cesium-137 indicated a nuclear weapons explosion, but a lower ratio is linked with nuclear reactors. In the nearly 50 collected meat samples, the team found 88% of the samples were above the Germany's regulatory limits for radioactive cesium in food. Calculating the ratio of cesium isotopes in the samples, they found that nuclear weapons testing accounted for 10 to 68% of the contamination.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière. La promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle. C'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Ashok Sharma and Ajaz Hussain of the Associated Press brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. India launched its first space mission to study the sun on Saturday, less than 2 weeks after a successful uncrewed landing near the south polar region of the moon. The Aditya L1 spacecraft took off on board a satellite launch vehicle from the Srihakoda Space Center in southern India on a quest to study the sun from a point about 930,000 miles from Earth. The point, known as L1, affords an uninterrupted view of the sun. The spacecraft is equipped with 7 payloads to study the sun's corona, chromosphere, photosphere, and solar wind, the Indian Space Research Organization said. After over an hour, the ISRO said the launch was accomplished successfully. The vehicle has placed the satellite precisely into its intended orbit. India's first solar observatory has begun its journey to the destination of Sun-Earth L1 point, the ISRO posted on the platform formerly known as Twitter. India became the first country to land a spacecraft near the moon's south pole on August 23rd, a historic voyage to uncharted territory that scientists believe could hold vital reserves of frozen water. After a failed attempt to land on the moon in 2019, India joined the U.S., Russia, and China as only the fourth country to achieve that milestone. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will meet up here tomorrow for Terrytown Chowder Tuesdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we will meet up here tomorrow, right here, in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair. T'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.